Alara woke up very happy on the morning of her wedding day. She put on a beautiful white gown, and her heart was full of joy. The sun was rising, and golden light came through the windows of the hotel. She felt like a princess, ready to marry her prince. But when she walked into the room where her soon-to-be husband Caspian was staying, everything changed. Her smile disappeared. She froze in shock. On the bed, Caspian was lying down, and Alara's mom, Drusilla, was on top of him. Alara stood there, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Her mouth felt dry. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Finally, she whispered, "Mom." Drusilla looked up and saw her daughter standing in the doorway. Her face turned white. She scrambled off the bed quickly, trying to cover herself. Caspian looked shocked too, his face full of shame. Alara couldn't take it. Without saying anything, she turned and ran. Tears filled her eyes as she fled from the room. Her long wedding gown swished behind her as she ran down the hotel hallway. Caspian realized what had just happened and jumped up. "Alara, wait. It's not what you think," he yelled, his voice desperate. But he stopped suddenly. He was only wearing his underwear. Embarrassed, he ran back into the room to put on clothes. Alara kept running. She rushed down the hotel stairs, blinded by tears. She didn't see her father, Alistair, coming up the stairs. She bumped into him so hard that both almost fell. Alistair caught her. "Alara, what's wrong? What happened?" he asked, his face full of worry. But Alara was too shocked to speak. She pointed shakily toward Caspian's room and cried, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" Then she pulled away from Alistair and ran down the stairs again. Her father stood there, heart pounding with fear. Something terrible had happened. Alistair hurried to Caspian's room. When he opened the door, his face turned pale. He saw Drusilla's clothes on the floor, Caspian still in his underwear, and Drusilla trying to cover herself. "Drusilla!" Alistair shouted, his voice shaking with anger. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Drusilla bent her head in shame, too embarrassed to meet his eyes. Caspian also looked away, ashamed of himself. The room was silent except for Alistair's heavy breathing. Meanwhile, Alara ran out of the hotel doors, her heart beating wildly. She didn't know where to go. She just wanted to get away. Her gown fluttered behind her like a ghost. As she ran toward the hotel gate, she didn't see a car driving toward her. The driver honked loudly, but it was too late. Alara was so lost in her thoughts and tears that she ran straight into the car. The car screeched to a stop. The driver jumped out. It was Chief Lysander, Caspian's father. He had just arrived from a long business trip in the USA to attend his son's wedding. He gasped when he saw Alara in her wedding dress, running like she was being chased by a monster. Before he could ask what was wrong, Alara collapsed on the road. Chief Lysander panicked. "Alara, Alara, can you hear me?" he called, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer. Her eyes were closed, and she lay still. The hotel's security guard ran over to help. Together, they carefully carried Alara to the back seat of the car. "We need to take her to the hospital now," Chief Lysander said, his hands shaking. The guard nodded, and they jumped into the car. Chief Lysander drove as fast as he could, his mind racing. What had happened? Why was Alara running like that? Where was everyone else? Back at the hotel, Caspian had finally gotten dressed. He rushed outside, hoping to find Alara. He saw his father's car speeding away, and caught a glimpse of Alara lying in the back seat. "Dad, wait!" he yelled, but the car was already far away. Caspian quickly got into his own car and sped after them. Inside the hotel, people were whispering and panicking. Bridesmaids, family members, and friends had seen Alara run out crying. They had seen Caspian and his father race away in their cars. No one knew what was going on, but they could feel that something terrible had happened. The happy wedding day had turned into chaos. At the hospital, Chief Lysander jumped out of his car and ran to the back seat to check on Alara. Caspian arrived just behind him. Together, they carefully lifted Alara out and placed her on a stretcher as hospital staff rushed over. "Please help her," Chief Lysander shouted. Doctors and nurses hurried Alara into the emergency room. Caspian and his father waited outside, their hearts heavy with fear. Back at the hotel, Alistair's phone rang. It was Caspian, telling him what had happened and where Alara was. Alistair's face turned pale. He ran to his car to drive to the hospital. "Wait, Alistair. I'm coming too." A voice called from behind. It was Drusilla. She stood there, looking guilty and worried. But Alistair was too angry to care. He glared at her and muttered under his breath, slamming the car door. He drove away without waiting for her. Drusilla stood alone, tears streaming down her face. At the hospital, Caspian and his father paced nervously. Chief Lysander couldn't take it anymore. "Caspian, tell me what happened. Why was Alara running like that?" he demanded. Caspian looked down ashamed. "Dad, it's a long story. I'll explain later," he whispered. But his father wasn't satisfied. "Caspian, this is serious. Tell me now," he said, his voice firm. Caspian took a deep breath, ready to explain, when suddenly the emergency room doors opened. Alistair rushed in, his face full of worry. When Alistair saw Chief Lysander, he froze. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Their eyes were full of emotions. Then Chief Lysander shouted, "Alistair!" His voice was angry and shocked. Alistair felt a deep guilt wash over him. He opened his mouth to say something, but just then the doors opened again. Drusilla walked in with Alara's younger brother, Kieran. When Drusilla saw Chief Lysander, she gasped. "Lysander!" she cried, her voice trembling. Caspian looked at them, confused. "Why are you all acting like this? What's going on?" he asked. Chief Lysander turned to his son, pointing at Alistair and Drusilla. "Who are these people? Do you know them?" he asked sharply. Caspian nodded. "Dad, they're Alara's parents." As soon as he said that, Lysander's face turned pale. He shouted, "What? This marriage can never happen. You cannot marry Alara." Caspian froze. "But why?" he asked, shocked. "What's wrong? Why can't I marry her?" Lysander clenched his fists, his mind full of memories he didn't want to speak. He looked at Alistair and Drusilla, his face full of anger and pain. He knew something that Caspian didn't. A secret that made the marriage impossible. The hallway grew tense and quiet. Everyone stood frozen, waiting for someone to speak. But all they could hear were the distant sounds of doctors working to save Alara. Finally, a doctor came out, looking serious. "Alara is awake," he said. "But she lost a lot of blood from her leg injury. She needs rest." Both families hurried into Alara's room. Alara lay in bed, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. When she saw them, she cried out, "Take me home. I want to go home now." Everyone tried to calm her. "Please, Alara," the doctor said gently. "You're hurt. You need to stay here so we can take care of you." But Alara shook her head, crying. "No. Please take me home," she begged. Caspian's father was still angry. "Why did Alara run away like that?" he asked again, looking at everyone. Caspian was confused. "Dad, why are you saying I can't marry Alara? What's going on?" Caspian walked closer to Alara and gently touched her arm. "Alara, how are you feeling?" he asked softly. Alara's eyes filled with rage. She pulled her arm away. "Don't touch me," she screamed. "You betrayed me. You cheated on me with my own mom." Her voice cracked, and she burst into tears, unable to hold the pain inside. Chief Lysander's face turned pale. He was shocked by what he had just heard. "What?" he shouted in disbelief. His voice was full of anger and sadness. He looked at Caspian with disappointment, then turned his eyes to Alara's mom, Drusilla. "How could you be so heartless, even to your own daughter?" Lysander's voice shook as he spoke. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but his eyes stayed cold. "You haven't changed at all, Drusilla. You did this to me years ago, and now you've done the same thing to Alara." Alara's parents, Alistair and Drusilla, stood frozen. Their faces turned red with shame. They couldn't look at anyone. The room was heavy with silence. Everyone felt the weight of the truth hanging in the air. Alara and Caspian stared at each other, their minds spinning with confusion. You know her?" Alara asked Lysander softly, her voice shaking. "What are you talking about? What did she do to you?" Caspian asked, echoing Alara's question. He looked at his father, searching his face for answers. "Dad, what do you mean? What happened between you and Alara's mom?" Alara's younger brother stood quietly beside her, his eyes wide. Everyone turned to Lysander. They all wanted to hear the truth. Lysander sighed deeply. His eyes were filled with sadness as he began to speak. A long time ago, Lysander said softly, I was in love with a beautiful woman. Her name was Drusilla. Alara gasped. She turned her head quickly to look at her mom, who now hung her head low in shame. Lysander continued, his voice trembling. We were very happy together. We lived in a small apartment. Life was not easy, but we loved each other. I worked very hard to take care of her. I wanted her to have everything she needed. Alara, Caspian, and Alara's brother listened closely, not moving a muscle. One day, Lysander said, my best friend Alistair, yes, the man who is now your father, Alara, had just finished school. He was looking for a job, but he couldn't find one. He was struggling. I didn't want him to suffer, so I invited him to stay with us. Alara looked at her father. Alistair stood silently, his face full of guilt. Alistair moved in with us. Lysander went on. I worked hard every day to support both Drusilla and Alistair. We didn't have much money, but I always tried to make sure there was food on the table. I loved Drusilla so much. I just wanted to make her happy. Lysander stopped for a moment. His eyes filled with tears. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. One day, Lysander whispered, I decided to talk to my uncle. My uncle was a kind man with connections. I thought maybe he could help Alistair get a job. Alistair had been searching for months, but had no luck. I wanted to help him. Lysander swallowed hard. The memory seemed painful. I left the house that morning, feeling hopeful. I talked to my uncle, and he promised to help Alistair. I was so happy on my way back home. I thought everything was going to be okay. Lysander's voice broke. Tears rolled down his cheeks. But when I got home, I found something I never expected. His voice cracked. I opened the door, and there was Alistair, my best friend, on top of Drusilla, the woman I loved more than anything. Everyone in the room gasped. Alara's heart ached. She turned to look at her mother, who was now quietly crying, her face full of guilt. My heart shattered, Lysander said, crying openly now. I couldn't believe it. The two people I cared about most betrayed me. I felt like my world was falling apart. Tears filled Alara's eyes as she listened. Caspian and Alara's brother looked pale, shocked by the story. I didn't know what to do, Lysander continued. I was lost, broken. I left. I couldn't stay there anymore. I lost everything that day, my best friend, the woman I loved, and the life I had dreamed of. Alara and her brother turned to look at their father. Alistair's eyes were wet with tears too. He looked so ashamed. Lysander turned back to Drusilla. His voice was firm but filled with pain. You broke my heart, Drusilla. And now, seeing what you've done to your own daughter, it hurts even more. Alara burst into tears. Her heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. She didn't know what to say or feel. Caspian clenched his fists. He couldn't stay quiet anymore. He turned to Alara's father with anger in his eyes. How could you do this to your best friend? Caspian shouted. How could you betray him like that? Alistair's mouth opened to speak, but Lysander raised his hand. His face was filled with anger. Shut up, Caspian. Lysander shouted, his voice booming. I am so disappointed in you. Your fiancé's mom. How could you? You are a disgrace. Caspian flinched. His father's words cut deep, but he knew he had to explain himself. Dad. Alara, please listen, Caspian said, his voice shaking. It's not what you think. Everyone turned to look at him. Caspian took a deep breath. I had just come out of the shower, Caspian said. I was in my hotel room when Alara's mom walked in. I didn't understand why she was there, so I asked if she needed something. Everyone stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. Then she started acting strange, Caspian said, his voice breaking. She tried to seduce me. Alara gasped and looked at her mom. I told her to stop, Caspian continued. I didn't want this. But she wouldn't listen. She started taking off her clothes. Caspian's voice trembled as he spoke. I was scared and confused. I didn't want to disrespect her because she's your mom, Alara. But I didn't want this to happen either. I asked her to leave politely. Instead of leaving, she pushed me, and I fell onto the bed. She climbed on top of me. I was shocked. I tried to push her away, and that's when Alara walked in. Alara's eyes filled with tears. She could see the pain in Caspian's face. His voice was full of honesty. Lysander turned to Drusilla, his face twisted with disgust. "How could you do this?" he said bitterly. "How could you hurt your own daughter like this?" Drusilla couldn't even lift her head. She was too ashamed. Alara was torn. Her heart ached as she looked at Caspian, then her parents. She didn't know who to trust or what to believe. Suddenly, Alara's body went limp. She collapsed. "Alara!" Caspian shouted, rushing to catch her. "Doctor! We need a doctor!" someone cried. A doctor rushed in and quickly checked her. "Everyone out of the room now," the doctor commanded. Everyone hurried out, their hearts pounding with fear. They waited anxiously in the hospital's waiting room. Caspian paced back and forth. Alara's parents sat silently, their faces pale with guilt. Chief Lysander stood in a corner, arms crossed, his face unreadable. The door suddenly swung open. Caspian's mom walked in. She wore a beautiful traditional outfit and was followed by a group of women who had been helping her plan the wedding. "Caspian, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. "Why is everyone here? Why are we in a hospital and not at the church?" No one answered. The tension in the room was too heavy. She walked over to Alara's parents. She had spent weeks working with them to plan this wedding while her husband, Chief Lysander, had been away on a business trip in the United States. She had done everything to make this day perfect. "Please tell me what's happening," she begged. "Why are we here? What happened to Alara?" But Alistair and Drusilla stayed silent. Drusilla couldn't even look up. "Why is everyone so quiet? Someone tell me." Caspian's mom pleaded. Just then, the doctor came out of Alara's room. His face was serious. "Alara needs blood," he said. "She has lost a lot of blood. We must act quickly to save her." The room went silent. Everyone froze in fear. "I can give her my blood," Alara's younger brother said, standing up. He was determined to help his sister. The doctor nodded and quickly took him away to test his blood. Everyone waited nervously. Minutes later, the doctor returned, his face sad. "I'm sorry," the doctor said softly. "His blood doesn't match Alara's." Everyone was shocked. Alara's parents stared at each other. They had not expected this. "I'll donate my blood," Alistair said firmly, stepping forward. "I'm her father. My blood should match hers." The doctor nodded and took Alistair away to test him. But when the doctor returned, his face was even more serious. "The blood doesn't match," the doctor said, looking directly at Alistair. "Are you sure you're Alara's father?" The room froze. Everyone's eyes widened. Alistair's mouth opened in shock. "Of course I'm her father," Alistair shouted, his voice shaking. But the doctor shook his head. "The blood type doesn't match at all. We can't use it." Now the room was filled with confusion. If Alistair's blood didn't match, what did that mean? Caspian's mom finally spoke up, her voice trembling. "Doctor, what do we do now? Please save Alara." "We'll have to get blood from the blood bank," the doctor said. "That's the fastest way to save her life." Everyone nodded quickly. It was their only option. The confusion about Alara's blood type was put aside for the moment. The most important thing right now was to save her life. The doctor quickly arranged to get the blood Alara needed. While the doctors worked, both families sat in the waiting room. Their minds were full of questions and worries. When Alara was finally allowed to leave the hospital, everyone felt so relieved. She was safe, and that was all that mattered. The wedding that was supposed to be a happy celebration didn't seem important anymore. Alara's health was now the main focus. The joy of the wedding day was replaced with worry and sadness about everything that had happened. A few days later, Alara's dad, Alistair, invited Chief Lysander and his family over to his house. Alistair's own family was there too. He wanted to talk about the shocking discovery about Alara's blood type and clear up all the confusion. When everyone gathered in Alistair's house, the room was silent. Nobody spoke. There was a heavy feeling in the air. Alistair took a deep breath and finally spoke. "First, I want to apologize to you, Lysander," Alistair said, looking at Chief Lysander. I'm so sorry for all the trouble and confusion this has caused. Chief Lysander nodded slowly, but his face was filled with anger and sadness. Alistair turned to his wife. We need to get to the bottom of this, he said firmly. Drusilla, please tell us. Who is Alara's real father? Drusilla sat with her head bowed in shame. She didn't want to speak. She was too scared and embarrassed to tell the truth. But everyone's eyes were on her. Both families were waiting for her answer. After lots of encouragement and pleading, Drusilla finally opened her mouth. I think. Alara's real father is Lysander, Drusilla said softly, her voice shaking. The room went silent. Drusilla began to cry as she explained. When Lysander sent us away, I found out I was pregnant. I was so scared. I didn't want to lose Alistair, and I didn't know how to tell him the truth, so I kept it a secret. Alara gasped. Tears filled her eyes. She couldn't believe what her mother had just said. Caspian, standing beside Alara, looked down at the floor, his mind spinning. Alistair's face turned pale. You mean, I've been raising a child who isn't mine? He asked, his voice full of pain. Drusilla nodded, crying. I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you would leave me. I was wrong to hide it from you. I'm so sorry. Chief Lysander looked heartbroken. He turned to Drusilla. You kept this secret for so long. You hurt so many people with your lies. This is worse than I ever imagined. The room was heavy with sadness and anger. Alara sat in shock, tears rolling down her cheeks. She couldn't speak. Caspian's hands started to shake. He remembered Mr. Alistairson's words and his heart pounded so hard that it was all he could hear. Suddenly, he shouted through his tears. Are you saying, Alara, my fiancée, the woman I'm going to marry, is my sister? His voice broke with sorrow. Everyone turned to him, shocked. Caspian's knees gave way, and he fell to the ground. He couldn't stand. His dreams, his future, and everything he had planned with Alara flashed before his eyes. Now all of it was ruined. The thought that the love of his life might actually be his sister was too painful to bear. Alara's heart broke at the sight of Caspian crying so hard. She wanted to run to him, hug him, and tell him everything would be okay. But she couldn't. She was just as confused and heartbroken as he was. Tears ran down her face as she whispered his name, Caspian. Her voice was soft and shaky. She couldn't speak anymore. The silence was broken when Chief Lysander slammed his fist on the table. No, he shouted angrily. We can't just believe this. We need a DNA test to be sure. Everyone jumped at his outburst, but they all knew he was right. They needed proof. Alistair, who had been standing quietly in the corner, finally broke down. Tears streamed down his face. He had always been the strong one in the family, but this news crushed him. He remembered watching Caspian and Alara grow close, their love blooming over the years. Now, that love might be something they could never have. The room was filled with crying. Alara cried softly, Caspian sobbed loudly, and even Alistair's strong voice cracked with grief. Chief Lysander, who was always the pillar of strength, now looked shaken as he paced around the room. Finally, they all agreed. A DNA test was needed. A date was set. The days before the test felt like forever. Every second was heavy with fear and uncertainty. Caspian and Alara couldn't even look at each other without feeling their hearts shatter all over again. They had spent years dreaming of a life together, but now those dreams might disappear in an instant. The day of the DNA test arrived. The atmosphere was tense. Alara, Caspian, Chief Lysander, Alistair, Drusilla, and Alara's younger brother all went to the clinic. Everyone was nervous and scared. The nurse carefully collected blood samples from each of them. The samples were labeled and sent to the lab. All they could do now was wait. The waiting was terrible. The whole house felt heavy with silence. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts, their own fears. Finally, the day came when the results were ready. Everyone gathered in the large living room. The tension was so thick that it was hard to breathe. Chief Lysander sat with his hands clenched tightly. Caspian paced back and forth. Alara sat next to her little brother, holding his hand. Alistair and Drusilla sat apart, their faces unreadable. The doctor walked in carrying a sealed envelope. He sat at the front of the room. Everyone stared at him, He opened the envelope slowly and unfolded the paper inside. The DNA test results are here, the doctor said calmly. Alara is indeed the biological daughter of Chief Lysander. The room gasped. Caspian's knees gave out, and he sat down hard. Alara, my fiancée, is my sister, he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears poured down his face as he buried his face in his hands. Alara cried too. The room was filled with their sobs. Chief Lysander was in shock. This can't be true, he shouted. We must take another test. But the doctor raised his hand to calm him. There's more, he said. The room went silent again. The doctor continued. We also ran a paternity test for Alara's younger brother. The results show he is not Alistair's biological son either. Alistair gasped, his face turning pale. Everyone turned to Drusilla. Her face burned with shame. She looked away, unable to meet their eyes. Alistair's voice cracked. Drusilla, how could this happen? Drusilla cried harder. She couldn't hide anymore. Chief Lysander shouted, his voice trembling. Drusilla, tell us. Who is Alara's brother's father? Drusilla's lips shook. She hesitated, but the pressure was too much. She whispered, It's Tafari. Alistair's eyes widened. Tafari, our old gatekeeper? Drusilla nodded, her face red with embarrassment. Alistair felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. He couldn't believe this. He stumbled back, pale, and suddenly collapsed to the ground. Dad! Alara screamed, rushing to her father's side. She cried uncontrollably as everyone panicked around her. The room was filled with chaos. Tears, shouting, and heartbreak surrounded them all.